What does it all mean?
This is where the archaeology has been found.
Oh, hi, how are you? Oh, look at that.
I need a planter. A shrine to a belly button.
This is a rock skull?
Look at that.
No one gets into this, but no one.
Whoa, don't take me too far.
Now that's naked archaeology.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the Garden of Eden, and Adam and Eve, the first humans which he placed in the garden. And what did Adam and Eve wear? Well, nothing. In fact, only after they sinned and ate from the forbidden fruit of good and evil were they aware of their nakedness and covered themselves with leaves. The first fashion statement.
Think about the first story in the Bible, the story of the Garden of Eden. The humans were innocent in the garden, but the moment they lost their innocence, they put clothes on.
I'm so proud of being the naked archaeologist.
Right, and you are a very innocent person.
Adam and Eve, Exodus, David and Goliath. The great stories of the Bible, everybody remembers them. But we usually don't pay attention to what the characters from the Bible wear. Did Moses, David, and later Jesus follow biblical fashion trends? Well, Jesus was more famous for his food, not his clothes. The Last Supper is the most famous episode of the Christian Bible. It's the last meal Jesus shared with his 12 disciples before his crucifixion. They ate bread and drank wine, but what did they wear?
Did you ever think about textiles and religion?
No.
I think they were very God-fearing then.
So they wore kosher clothes?
Yeah.
So, to figure out what biblical characters wore, let's go back to the Hebrew Bible. As it turns out, there's an actual fashion commandment in the Bible. All men must wear tzitzit, fringes that hang from the four corners of a garment, and at least one of the threads should be tchelet, a particular kind of blue. To understand why biblical characters would wear tzitzit, I'm going to see Avraham Segol. He's a modern tailor with a bit of an obsession about tzitzit and their meaning.
So the God of Israel says, you will put on your corners these fringes, these tzitziot, so that you remember to do all the commandments I have given you.
You saying God said, you know what? From now on, so you remember all the commandments.
Tie it to your garment.
Tie it to your garment. And that means these are holy fringes.
Tzitziot.
Commanded in the Bible.
Yes.
So is God making a fashion statement? Or did everyone in ancient days wear holy fringes? Well, let's start by looking at the biblical Philistines. Delilah was a Philistine. Did she wear fringes? Women in the Bible didn't wear fringes, but Delilah probably didn't wear much, so she doesn't count. What about the other famous Philistine? Goliath. In movies, he's shown wearing armor. In real life, he probably wore armor and fringes.
What did the Philistines look like? What did Delilah's people look like? What did Goliath's people look like? The fact is, we don't know what Delilah looked like because we have no depictions of Philistine women. But we do have depictions of Philistine men. And these are blown up depictions made out of the only images of Philistine warriors that we have. And they come from Egypt from the time of Ramses II, some 3,200 years ago. And you could see they're wearing feathered headgear of some sort with ranks right over here. They have long swords and they also have short daggers. They're wearing kilts and they have fringes at the corner of their kilts, which probably signified some kind of religious tassels, some kind of holy knots, if you will.
Unfortunately, we don't know what color these Philistine fringes were, and in the Bronze Age, color could tell you a lot. In our own day, you can identify athletes by the color of their uniforms. Similarly, in ancient times, you could learn a lot about a person by the color of their fringes. For example, we know that in ancient Egypt, people wore fringes with threads and knots in red. Actually, the Hebrew word tzitzit may have originated from the repetition of an ancient Egyptian word tit, a red symbol and amulet in the shape of a knot, also called blood of Isis. Scholars have suggested that this symbol may represent the female reproductive system or a menstrual bandage that was used for casting love and sexual fidelity spells. It was also a symbol of high status. In another part of the Mediterranean, on the Greek island of Santorini, a famous tourist hotspot in the Aegean Sea, in 1964, archaeologists discovered a Bronze Age Minoan city named Akrotiri. In this ancient city, beautiful and well-preserved frescoes were excavated. There, you can still see 3,500-year-old wall paintings depicting women wearing tassels with knots very similar to the knots of tassels that religious Jews wear today. Remarkably, on one gorgeous fresco illustrating a bare-breasted priestess, the color of fringes is blue. It's the color of tzitzit, as in the Bible. Okay, now that I've seen them, I want to touch them. Not the priestesses, the tzitzit. Are there any actual ancient tassels that have survived? I'm on my way to a huge antiquities warehouse in Jerusalem where thousands of pieces of ancient textiles are stored and restored. They've arrived here from archaeological sites all over Israel. Let's see if they have authentic biblical tassels. Moses, David, and Jesus. The stories tell us what they did, but do we know what they wore? In my quest to find out what the characters of the Hebrew and Christian Bibles wore, I discovered that they put fringes on the corners of their garments, as do all religious Jewish men to this day. So far, we've seen ancient murals that depict them, but we haven't seen any actual tassels that survived from biblical times. I'm in Jerusalem in a huge warehouse of biblical textiles. Orit Shamir runs the organic material department of the Israel Antiquities Authority, and she's got some tassels. These were found by the late Professor Yigael Yadin in a Judean desert cave.
He thought these tassels were made in order to use in mantles as tzitzit, but it was found not connected to a mantle. The Jewish community, when they buried, they took tassels out from the garment. Because of this, we don't find any intact garment with these tassels.
Also, let me get this straight. When somebody died and they buried them in a burial shroud, they would take the tassels away because they're holy, they would want to reuse them. So that's why you don't find tassels connected to shrouds. I never knew that.
But you know, it is the only site in the land of Israel which we found something like this.
Is that the way biblical tassels are supposed to be made?
Maybe.
We don't know.
We don't know.
It doesn't seem like these tassels are actual tzitzit, because the knots are not correct. Only one string should be colored, and it shouldn't be purple, it should be blue, a sacred blue called techelet. The blue string was to remind the Israelites of the sea of the sky, and the sky of God's holy throne. What makes the techelet special and different from regular blue is the fact that it is made not from a plant dye, but from a special snail called hilazon. Nobody has ever found a blue dye that can be traced back to this snail. I'm on my way to see Tzvi Koren, a chemist and ancient textile and color specialist. I met Tzvi before when he figured out where techelet came from. But now he may have finally found what it looks like. He has an amazing collection of ancient fabric samples, and from them he can analyze dyes and trace their origins.
That's very fine work. Why couldn't this be some kind of ancient tzitzis? To me, this looks very fringy, and I don't know what their fringes look like.
The color is not of a dark enough nature, and too many fringes there.
Religious Jews wear four-cornered garments with fringes, and certainly in those days, they would have had a blue stripe in the fringes, right?
A blue twisted yarn in the fringes.
Jesus would have worn something like that.
Very likely. He was a good Jew.
Not only Jesus wore tzitzit, but after him, some of the early Christians did too. The Ravenna mosaics from the 6th century provide evidence of that.
The Bible says, tchelet, this mysterious color. What's it talking about?
It's talking about the blue or purple. A biblical blue was obtained from a murex trunculus snail. But so far, there's not been a biblical blue that's ever been found. Let me show you some ancient textiles. This is one of the more beautiful dark blue colors.
Yeah, it hasn't faded.
And maybe this is the color of tchelet. This may not be authentic tchelet from snails, but perhaps tchelet has this kind of dark blue color.
Have you tested it?
Not yet. But with
Well, I don't understand how you sleep at night. Here you have biblical tchelet. In the Bible, it says, wear this biblical blue. And you find this amazing dark blue, and you don't run to the lab to check it right away to see if it comes from snail or plant? Why don't you just test it? Because maybe...
this will be tested.
So are you serious? Are you going to do it soon?
I will do it. Chances are it will not be real
Just do it.
chelet.
It would be headlines, biblical blue found. Can you do it tomorrow? Seriously.
If you come here one of the 3 days, then I can do it for you.
That's naked archaeology. On-camera investigation.
I love the way you said that.
I love it.
It gets better, folks.
Moses, David, and Jesus have been represented in thousands of paintings and movies. But are their clothes depicted accurately? In my quest for an authentic costume for the biblical characters, I found that they probably wore holy threads, fringes called tzitzit. These fringes were to remind Jews of all the commandments, and at least one thread was supposed to be a special color of blue. So far, we found depictions of fringes on ancient murals, but no actual fringes that have survived ancient times. But we have found a sample of blue that might be the biblical blue we're looking for. But while we wait for our chemist to test it, I'm going to drop by my friend Laura Shem, a costume designer who specializes in biblical fashion, to ask her what she thinks about my clothes.
Up to date.
You shouldn't laugh at me.
No, you look fine.
I look fashionable in my own way.
Yeah.
I've got my own look, right?
Yeah, no.
I'm a free man. I'm not a slave to fashion.
No, you are not.
You've done biblical clothes?
Yes.
When you approach this, you approach it as a scholar, as a historian, or archaeologist?
Of course, I want to be authentic, but what is important for me is the feel of the period. The clothes have to be a dynamic. It's not a piece in a museum.
For you, it has to be alive.
I make to every garment a script. They wear it when they sleep or when they travel.
You imagine them, they're cleaning it, they're wearing it, they're
Yes,
patching
yes.
it. Colors that you chose, the fabrics that you choose, even the little bit of stitching, it feels real and it feels biblical. I'm telling you, if I throw some of your materials into an archaeological setting, it might fool them.
For sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But you know, it wouldn't fool the chemist. They'd look and they'd see
Yeah.
more. My friend Tzvi would figure you out.
And by now, he should be ready for us. So I'm going back to Tzvi Koren's lab to test the piece of textile from Jesus' time, which could turn out to be dyed with the true biblical blue.
I'm feeling good that this is biblical blue.
You sure? You have good vibes?
Yeah, I do.
This little piece, we're going to cut out a little fiber found at the scene of the archaeological site. We place it right into this vial. We're going to take an organic solvent, and it's used for stripping off any kind of blue colorant, whether it's from a plant or from snails. We're going to put this and heat it up for about 5 to 7 minutes in boiling water at 100 degrees Celsius, and then watch how the color is extracted. 5 minutes and counting.
Give me a blue, give me a B, give me an L-U-E. Listen to that. That says the dye should have extracted. And has it?
No.
Something is wrong. It's
There
not
is.
extracting. To me, it looks a little purplish.
We're going to analyze this solution. I'm going to take it all in. You see the 70 mark? And that's enough. We inject it into here and catching the excess amount of liquid back into the filter.
Okay, you
That's
ready?
right. You go. Good.
I'm a chromatographer.
Absolutely.
A naked chromatographer.
There's going to be a sharp spike coming up. That means there's some indigo in here. Yeah, there's a little bit of indigo. There it is. With the cursor on the top, you see the little spike over there? That's a tiny bit of indigo.
Now, if it was biblical blue, what would we see?
You'll see indigo also, but considerably more. No, I'm sorry, guys. I hate to disappoint you, but it's just not going to happen with this sample. Maybe one day we'll have the privilege of finding the true biblical blue, which no one has ever found.
I wanted it to be biblical blue as your shirt, Tzvi.
Tomorrow is
Another day.
In my journey to find out what the famous characters of the Hebrew and Christian Bibles wore, I discovered that Moses, David, and Jesus probably put on fringes called tzitzit at the corners of their garments. One string in those fringes was dyed a sacred blue called tchelet. But does the Hebrew Torah have another clue for biblical clothing? In Deuteronomy, we discover another law for clothing. Thou shalt not wear wool and linen together. In the Bible, shatnez, mixed wool and linen, is prohibited. One of the important principles of the Hebrew Bible is separation. Darkness from light, water from dry land, meat from milk, as well as linen from wool. If they're mixed, they're not kosher. Can archaeology show that people actually followed this law? I'm back at the Israel Antiquities Authority in Jerusalem to check in again with Orit Shamir.
People don't realize, they know about kosher food, but there's a biblical injunction that has kosher clothes. You can't mix linen and wool.
The Jewish community didn't mix wool and linen. In contrast, textiles from Egypt and from Syria, they were mixed textiles.
So when you examine this, you can actually tell, are they following the biblical law or not?
We found thousands of textiles in all these Jewish sites, and none of them is not made of shatnez, mixed wool and linen together.
Incredibly, you can tell whether ancients were following the Bible by analyzing their clothes. Maybe textiles can decode archaeological mysteries. For example, who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls? Can biblical fashion help solve this archaeological mystery? Well, one of the places where a lot of ancient textiles were found is Qumran, where it is said that the scrolls were written by a religious group called the Essenes. The Essenes were a Christian-like movement which followed a man they called the Teacher of Righteousness. Some scholars believe this teacher was the prototype of the Christ figure. Other scholars think that the Essenes were actually a Christian group and the Teacher of Righteousness was James, the brother of Jesus. So maybe the textiles of the Essenes found here can tell me not only who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, but what Jesus and his followers wore. In 1947, a shepherd boy threw stones into a cave. And when the stones hit a ceramic jar, the boy went in to investigate. Inside the jars were ancient scrolls, some containing the oldest known copies of passages of the Bible. Over the years, there have been various theories about what Qumran was used for. Some feel strongly that the Essenes lived here and wrote the scrolls here. Others think it was just a pottery factory or a farm. But some of the linen textiles found here at Qumran might help solve the mystery.
Very interesting, the story about the linen textiles in Qumran, where the Essenes, the sectarians, said they preferred to use linen textiles because it was against the Roman world, which was very colorful. So in contrast to the Roman world, they used linen, white garments, undyed. I will show you some examples.
No, this is amazing because what you're telling me now is you can actually see religion and ideology, because the movement that actually Christianity emerged out of the same kind of messianic movement, Ebionites, poor ones, no ostentatious. They rejected the Roman world. Everything about the Roman world, the food, and even the clothes. They're saying we're not going to be fashion victims.
Yeah, and also they want to be modest. They didn't want to use bright colors
They
like
didn't want to show
red.
off.
They used undyed, simple textiles.
You know what? Everybody's arguing, did the Essenes write the Dead Sea Scrolls? You've got the proof right here.
It is written in the scrolls that they used to wear linen garments, so we can see it here.
This is amazing. The proof is in the linen.
This linen is bleached. It is very white compared to this linen. So they made special process in order to give it the white color. But of course, they didn't dye.
The person who wore this might have written the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes.
If Jesus belonged to an Essene-like movement, as many scholars speculate, he might have worn garments made of this kind of material. I can imagine Jesus wearing clothes made of bleached linen like this. Another find from the site was a piece of fabric that Orit believes was used to cover one of the scrolls.
This, which came as a bunched up ancient poop, was restored by you, and you could see indigo. You could see that it's one of the pieces of linen cloth that wrapped the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes. It is very important and very rare because they decorated this piece with linen stripes made of indigo, and the design corresponds with the plan of the temple.
Are you kidding?
This is the intact design
The
of
design
this,
of the
yes.
lines, you know, you're decoding these little lines that to someone else would be just design. The people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls were designing the future temple or the existing
The
temple.
existing temple, which is also mentioned in the temple scroll.
But I just want to get it straight. What we have here is a piece of linen that was worn probably by one of the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's not a statement of fashion, it's a statement of religion, of ideology, of philosophy, because what they're doing is rejecting the Roman world by not wearing wool like the Romans, but linen, and not being ostentatious, but rather bleaching it white for purity. And they're wrapping their sacred scrolls in linen also, but with a slight blue design corresponding to the architecture of the temple. Somebody else looks at this and what they see is a piece of ancient material. You've actually decoded it. It's the Dead Sea Scrolls on Textiles.
Yes.
You know, I didn't think I would be looking at a 2,000-year-old piece of material and getting an insight into the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's exciting, but this is cutting edge.
I'm really amazed, because not only did ancient textiles teach me something new about the Dead Sea Scrolls, but the Dead Sea Scrolls helped me to decode what the Essenes and Jesus himself may have worn. All observant Jews from Moses through Jesus to today do not wear clothes made of mixed fibers of wool and linen, but they did and do wear tassels in the corners of their garments. So if you're making a biblical epic, dress your characters in wool or linen. Don't use fabrics which mix those two materials. But most importantly, don't forget about those fringes called tzitzit at the corners of their garments, with a blue thread in them, to remind us where the sea meets the sky and where God's holy throne is.
He's a total